He fired me with a smile on his face, 3 weeks before my stock options vested. 12 years of loyalty, and I was reduced to a cardboard box and a forced handshake. I lost more than a job that day. I lost the belief that playing fair ever got you anywhere. My name's Daniel Reed. 34, born and raised in Ohio, and until recently, I thought I had my life figured out. I was one of those guys who actually believed in the system. Work hard, keep your head down, and eventually, you'd be rewarded. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted stability. A house my wife could make a home, a future my son could count on. But turns out the American dream has a loophole. It only works until someone higher up decides you're too expensive to keep around. I'd worked in strategy and operations for over a decade. Long hours, complex projects, pulling off last-minute turnarounds that saved departments from collapse. I wasn't flashy, but I delivered. Every quarter. On paper, I was exactly the kind of employee you'd want to keep. But reality doesn't care about paper. Reality cares about power. That power walked in one Monday morning in the form of Eric Langston. He was the new VP, early 40s, slick haircut, Bluetooth in his ear like he was constantly waiting for a more important call. He introduced himself at an all-hands meeting using phrases like lean execution and resource optimization. And by the end of the week, half the senior staff were walking on eggshells. You could smell the layoffs coming before he even finished unpacking his standing desk. Still, I didn't think I was in the crosshairs. I had solid performance reviews, led 2 successful restructurings, and trained half the junior staff. But logic doesn't matter when someone's looking to make a statement. Eric wanted to shake things up, and apparently, I was his first move. He called me into his office late on a Thursday, just before end of day, the time they always choose when they want to avoid a scene. He didn't even sit down. "Daniel," he said, "we're making strategic changes, and unfortunately, your role is being sunset." Sunset. Like I was a piece of software hitting end-of-life support. I asked if this was performance-related. He said no, just a restructuring, whatever that meant. HR was already standing outside with an envelope and a thin smile. I walked out with a box full of office junk, my hands trembling, and a pressure in my chest I couldn't swallow down. Worst part? My 5-year stock options, earned through blood and burnout, were set to vest in just 19 days. He knew that. Hell, I think that's why he timed it. I spent the next week in silence. My wife tried to stay positive, but every "it'll be okay" made me feel smaller. I wasn't just unemployed. I was humiliated. And deep down, I knew something in me had shifted. I wasn't the kind of man who plotted revenge. Not until that moment. I didn't jump into revenge right away. That's not how it works in real life. Real revenge, the kind that hits deep and lasts, isn't loud. It's quiet, methodical. It started with me sitting alone in my garage, staring at my old laptop with a cup of stale coffee, trying to figure out who the hell I was without the job. I had a resume full of bullet points, but none of them felt like they belonged to me anymore. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. You stop being afraid of falling. I spent my days brushing up on everything I'd put on the back burner. Digital strategy trends, startup funding patterns, market gaps in niche tech industries. I knew how operations ran, knew how to cut inefficiencies and scale teams without killing morale. I'd been doing it for years, for someone else. So I asked myself a question I'd never dared to consider before. Why not do it for myself? I pulled together some old contacts, people I trusted, people I'd mentored who'd moved on to bigger things. One of them, Leah, now a product lead at a rising fintech firm, told me, "You were always too smart to be a cog in someone else's wheel." That stuck. I didn't want to just get another job. I wanted to build something lean, sharp, and impossible to ignore. The idea came slowly. A consulting firm, but not the bloated kind that charged 7 figures to regurgitate slides. Mine would be different, fast-moving, focused on helping mid-sized businesses scale without selling their soul to VC overlords. Real solutions, not jargon. I called it Northbridge Strategies, named after the old bridge in my hometown that had stood for 100 years and carried more weight than it ever should have. Like me, I didn't take a paycheck for the first 6 months. I worked out of the back of a local co-working space with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, pitching services to anyone who'd listen. Most doors didn't open, but a few did. Enough. I landed my first client, a family-run logistics firm struggling to expand into e-commerce. I doubled their profits in 4 months. Word spread. I hired a few people, then a few more, former colleagues, hungry freelancers, people who'd been burned by the same system I had. We didn't wear suits. We didn't pretend to be something we weren't. We just did good work, and clients noticed. One night, about a year after I got fired, I was standing in the new office, a real office this time with glass walls and clean floors, when Leah messaged me. "You hear about Langston?" I hadn't. Turns out he'd been pushed out of his role. New execs decided his bold restructuring hadn't actually done anything but piss people off and damage internal morale. I stared at that message for a long time. That was the moment I knew. Fate had just cracked the door open. Now it was my turn to walk in. The news about Eric Langston being forced out didn't surprise me. Guys like him always overplay their hand. They're so used to punching down they forget someone might punch back one day. Still, I didn't feel any satisfaction, not yet. His fall wasn't my revenge. It was just the setup. A few weeks later, I ran into him. Total accident. I was grabbing coffee after a client pitch in Midtown, still in my rolled-up sleeves and worn boots, our uniform at Northbridge. He was in line behind me, looking smaller than I remembered. No Bluetooth, no tailored suit, just khakis and a frayed shirt collar. I almost didn't recognize him. He recognized me, though. "Dan?" he said, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if I'd turn around and punch him in the throat. I smiled, cool and polite. "Eric. Long time." He gave me the kind of half-nod you give someone you once stepped on and might need someday. "What are you up to these days?" I could have flexed right then, told him about the clients, the new office, the articles starting to pop up about Northbridge in trade magazines. But I didn't. I shrugged and said, "Just consulting. Small firm, helping companies clean up the mess guys like you leave behind." He laughed, a little too loud, nervous. "Well, if you ever need someone who understands the inside game, I've got bandwidth." I played it cool, but inside, the idea clicked instantly. What if I did hire him? Not for charity, for chess. Slowly, smartly. I wasn't just going to win, I was going to rewrite the board. I kept tabs on him over the next few months. Found out he was struggling to land something full-time. He'd made too many enemies, burned too many bridges. Corporate America has a short memory, but it remembers arrogance, especially the kind that tanks morale and guts productivity. He was consulting now, loosely, bouncing from one short-term gig to another. No traction. So I baited the hook. I reached out through a mutual connection, nothing direct. Just enough to plant the seed. 2 weeks later, his resume hit our inbox. Eric Langston, consultant, organizational restructuring. My new head of HR, a sharp ex-colleague named Terry, raised an eyebrow. "This the same Langston who let you go?" I nodded. "I want to bring him in." She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I hadn't. I had a plan. We scheduled the interview. He showed up in a cheap blazer, fake confidence stitched into every answer. He talked about his experience managing teams and navigating change. I nodded through all of it, gave him a tour of the office, then made him an offer. Junior consultant. Base pay, no bonus. 6-month probation. Reports directly to me. He hesitated for a second, but not long. Desperation makes quick decisions. When he shook my hand to accept the offer, I smiled, warm and steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was in control. The first few weeks were almost anticlimactic. Eric came in on time, kept his head down, and did what he was told. If he recognized the irony of reporting to the man he once dismissed like a paperclip, he didn't show it. That was fine. I wasn't after humiliation, not yet. I was after clarity about who he really was when stripped of title, power, and pretense. He struggled more than I expected. He was used to managing from a pedestal, not the ground floor. Here at Northbridge, we didn't have layers of fluff or meetings that could have been emails. Every project had skin in the game, and Eric quickly learned that throwing around buzzwords didn't cut it. I gave him a small account to manage, a mom-and-pop logistics firm expanding into digital. And within a week, the client was calling us, frustrated by Eric's lack of direction. I didn't scold him. I reassigned the account and told him, plainly, "We don't hide behind titles here. If something doesn't work, we fix it. Fast." He nodded, but I saw the sting in his pride. Good. That sting was the beginning of real growth, or for a guy like Eric, the beginning of collapse. But something strange happened after that. He started trying, really trying. He asked more questions, stayed late, shadowed our younger consultants without complaint. It was almost like he wanted to learn. Part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, he was changing. I didn't expect an apology, but some acknowledgement. That would have been enough. Then one afternoon I caught him in the conference room talking to one of our newer clients. Alone, unsanctioned. He was pitching a new direction for their business, something we hadn't reviewed, and worse, it sounded suspiciously like he was angling to take the client off platform, outside Northbridge. He didn't see me standing there until I stepped in and said, "Everything okay here?" The client looked between us, confused. "Eric said you were on board with this approach?" I kept my face calm, professional. "We'll regroup internally and get back to you." Then I looked at Eric. "Can I see you in my office?" Behind closed doors, I didn't yell. I didn't need to. "You lied," I said quietly. He tried to spin it. Said he was thinking outside the box, trying to show initiative. I shook my head. "This isn't initiative, it's sabotage." He opened his mouth to object, but I held up a hand. "Don't. You had a shot here, a real one, and you chose to play the same game that got you tossed from your last job." He went pale. The weight of it finally hit him. There were no more executive buddies to lean on, no safety net, just me. I didn't fire him, not yet. Instead, I demoted him, officially, changed his title from consultant to assistant analyst. He'd now report to one of the people he used to brush past in the hallway. He didn't argue. He just nodded, defeated. That's when I realized the revenge wasn't the demotion. The revenge was making him stay. You learn a lot about a man when you take away the illusion of importance. Eric Langston used to strut through office halls like he owned the oxygen. Now he waited outside meeting rooms with a notepad, asking junior consultants if they needed support with scheduling or file prep. His office, if you could call it that, was a shared desk in the bullpen near the kitchen, right under the flickering light we hadn't gotten around to fixing. Poetic. But here's the thing. I didn't enjoy watching him struggle, not the way I thought I would. At first, sure, there was a small, dark satisfaction in seeing karma play out right in front of me. But that faded. What replaced it was something more complex. Pity? Maybe. Curiosity, definitely. I started noticing little changes in him. He stopped trying to be the smartest voice in the room, started listening more. When one of our interns had a family emergency and needed help closing a time-sensitive proposal, Eric offered to stay late and guide her through it. No grand gesture, no performative act. Just help. He even came to me once, quietly, and said, "You were right." About all of it, I spent too long thinking titles meant intelligence. He didn't apologize, not directly, but it was the closest he'd come. And oddly enough, it landed heavier than any sorry could have. Still, I didn't forget who he had been. And I wasn't about to rewrite history just because he finally discovered humility. So when our biggest client, a high-growth tech firm out of Chicago, offered us an extended contract, I saw the opportunity. We needed someone to manage operations on site. It was a 6-month placement, heavy lifting, lots of grind, far from glamorous. No press, no spotlight, but high impact if done right. Most of our senior consultants passed on it. Too remote, too much grunt work. I called Eric into my office. "I want to offer you something," I said, leaning back in my chair. He perked up, eyes guarded but hopeful. "It's not a promotion, it's an assignment. Field work. 6 months embedded with Apex Tech in Illinois. You'll manage internal ops, fix their onboarding flow, and report progress weekly. It's hard, it's thankless, and it'll test everything you think you know." He didn't flinch. "You think I can handle it?" "I think it's the only way you'll find out if you can." He nodded slowly. "When do I leave?" "Monday." He stood, shook my hand. "Thanks for giving me the chance." As he walked out, I realized something. I no longer needed revenge. I'd already won, and now I was giving him the thing he never gave me, a chance to prove he was more than just a title. 6 months passed like a tide pulling out, slow and steady, but with weight behind it. We didn't hear much from Eric during that time, aside from his weekly updates. They were punctual, well-written, and, surprisingly, humble. No bragging, no ego, just numbers, challenges, and next steps. Every word of it read like a man rebuilding something from scratch. Except this time it wasn't a resume. It was character. Back at Northbridge, the company was thriving. We'd closed 2 more major clients, expanded to a second office in Denver, and earned a write-up in Inc. magazine about consulting firms that actually get it. I barely had time to sit, let alone reflect. But in the quiet moments, late nights after my son was asleep, or early mornings when the city hadn't woken up yet, I'd think about how far I'd come from that day in Eric's office, cardboard box in hand. Career in pieces. The man who fired me had become the man I now managed. But strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. Eric returned that December. He looked different, not just physically, though he'd clearly dropped the smug posture and expensive clothes. He looked settled, like someone who'd finally stopped trying to outrun himself. We met in my office that first morning back. He shook my hand like a colleague. Not a boss, not a subordinate. Just 2 men who'd been through the fire in different ways. "Apex Tech's CEO called me directly," I said, sliding a file across the desk. "Said you turned their back office into a machine, hired the right people, built them a structure they can grow into. You made an impact." Eric nodded. "I didn't cut corners this time. I just listened." I noticed. We sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just quiet. Real. "You probably had every reason to bury me," he said after a while. "But you didn't. You gave me a way back." I thought about that, about the irony of it all, about how his betrayal had cracked me open, but in doing so had made space for something better. Something mine. "You gave me something too," I replied. "You reminded me why I left that world behind, and why I'll never go back to it." He nodded again, slower this time. Then he stood up and said the one thing I never thought I'd hear from him. "I'm sorry, Daniel, for how I treated you. You didn't deserve it." And just like that, the last bit of bitterness melted out of my chest. Not because I needed the apology, but because I no longer needed to carry the weight of what he'd done. I'd already rewritten my future. The past was just the prelude. Eric stayed on as part of the team, and he earned his place, not through shortcuts, not through politics, but through work. Honest, patient, sometimes tedious work. And maybe that was the real revenge all along. Not reducing him, but raising the standard. I didn't want to crush him anymore. I wanted to lead better than he ever did. And now I finally was.